So again, hello everyone. Today we are having a great pleasure to have a great speaker, Emily Elsner from ETH Zurich, and we are going to talk about the project-based education. And of course, I would invite you to participate in this workshop fully, because Emily prepared some additional activities for us, some work in small groups, in rooms. And Emily, would you like to start?
Thanks a lot. Yes, I have some slides which I will share. Okay, hold on, sorry. No, hang on, wrong share. I need to go to Teams. I should know this. Thailand here. All right. Oh my God.
Almost there.
So, almost there. Now you got it.
Okay, that's perfect. Now we have it. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak about a topic close to my heart. Yeah, I want to kind of walk you through the foundations of a new educational approach, well, not so new, an uneducational approach that we're taking at ETH. What I'm going to try to cover today is a bit the why of PBE, why it's an interesting educational approach for higher education, and how we at ETH are working with it at the moment, including our definition and a new typology of project-based classes that we've developed. And then, very excitingly, I would like to invite you all to join me in building a project-based burger together. This will become clearer in a minute. But first of all, who am I? I think I know a few of you, but so I'm an educational developer at the PBE labs at ETH, and my background is quite mixed. I started in biology, I moved into nature conservation and did my PhD in human geography, although it was much more on the sociology side. So I've got quite a broad academic background. And since doing my PhD, I've done quite a number of different things. I've been an impact measurement consultant. I've been a trainer for the Swiss Innovation Agency. I've also been a co-founder of an education charity here in Zurich, where I live. And I joined ETH about 5 years ago now, and I initially designed and ran a social impact project as part of an executive education program here at the co-hosted actually between ETH Zurich and a business school in the east of Switzerland called Hochschule St. Gallen, HSG. So that was quite a high-profile project, and it was a very complex one to put in place because we had to work with executives who were very experienced individuals, but nonetheless they were in a learning environment, so there was a lot to navigate there. In addition to that, I was also a teaching coordinator for one of the chairs here at the university. And I joined PBE Labs in 2023. So I've been there about a year and a bit now. PBE Labs is part of the Unit for Teaching and Learning. This is a central support unit at the university. It was formally founded last year, combining two previous units. And it's really focused on strategic teaching development, promoting teaching innovation across the university. And it's really leading at the moment on a big academic calendar revision that ETH is undertaking over the next 3 years. PBE Labs is quite a small group within the wider unit. We're only 4. I'm happy that my boss is here as well. Florian, thank you for joining. And we serve the whole university. So any lecturer across the entire university who has a question about project-based education, how that works, what it could look like, can they have some support with designing something, we're there to support. Our mission as a group, or as a little PBE Labs, is to enable project-based education. We see it as a way to empower our graduates because they're going into a world of change. I think that's definitely something we've been observing in the last few weeks, how rapidly things can change, and the challenges that they will face and that we will all face are quite extreme. So equipping them to be the next leaders is very important. At PBE Labs, we work kind of on 4 verticals. So there's my vertical on supporting. So we provide expertise, support, inspiration for lecturers, but also we have a network of educational developers. So I provide support to them and anyone within the department who's got questions around how to do project-based education. We also coordinate the education of student coaches at ETH. That is something I'll come back to later in the presentation. But coaching is a really important life skill for students to get the opportunity to learn about early on, but it's also very helpful for project-based formats. the why, how that becomes important, will become clear later. In addition, we have the opportunity to run 2 innovative teaching spaces. These are purpose-built. They are very flexible, are designed to support project-based formats, but really they support any teaching style that needs group work, that needs a lot of interaction, maybe changes in classroom setup in the middle of a class. So they're really nice spaces, and we are interested to watch how our lecturers use them. And finally, we're working to build a network of lecturers and educational developers and anyone who's interested in this style of teaching, because project-based is, well, I think all teaching is a sort of, it's a practice, isn't it? You have to keep working on your skills, you have to keep being creative, and there's always something new that you can try out. So we want to promote people interested in that as they try things out. We want to learn from them, to share. And that's something the whole of my unit, the whole of UTL also shares as a mindset, like help our lecturers learn from each other, promote. And that's why it's a pleasure to be here today, to share more widely than just within ETH. Before I go any further, I'd love to know what those of you present today understand when you hear project-based education. It's a very helpful, given we don't know a lot of you, it's good to know a bit where sort of what you're already thinking about. Florian, can you drop the link into the chat, because I can't see the chat from where I am.
Hi, Emily. The link is in the chat, so
fantastic.
it should be working.
Thank you. If you can click on the link, people, and enter your, I think I said 4 words, that would be great. Oh, teamwork, absolutely. Yep. That's a very key part of project-based for us. Oh, this is very nice. I'm really happy to see some of this on. I'm really interested that the hands-on and teamwork are coming up really strongly. So that must mean quite a few of you entered those. Yeah, so this is great. Thank you so much for those responses. Feel free to keep dropping them in. We'll save the Menti as an image, and I'll put it into the presentation afterwards for you. But the things you put there are absolutely words I was hoping would come up. And this is a really good sign. So I think maybe we have quite a good shared understanding what this sort of teaching style can achieve. And I'm sure many of you already have an idea why it's quite good for higher education, but for those of you who've not had the opportunity to dive much into the learning theory, I just want to very briefly outline 2 sort of dominant learning theory approaches. Now, I have to confess now, this is not actually my specialism in, I've not directly studied or done a degree in educational theory or anything, but this is how I've come to understand the relevance of project-based education today. So there are 2 dominant bodies of thought on how learning happened. The first, which I think was dominant for quite a long time, was instructionism, where basically the assumption was people are, especially children, are blank slates or empty vessels, and you should fill them up with learning. It's quite passive. You can sit them in a room, put stuff in front of them, and they will learn and absorb. And I think it became clear quite a long time ago that that wasn't entirely the reality of how learning happens. And so this more constructivism approach emerged, where basically it became understood that, of course, learning happens because you build on what you already know, you add and build connections between the learnings that you already have and the new learning opportunities in front of you. And in order to do that really well, not everyone does it the same way. People come with different backgrounds. Even the youngest people among us come with very different experiences, and the way they construct their understanding of the world can be quite varied. So giving students a bit of flexibility, giving them some control over what they're learning and how they're learning is quite important. However, these two models somewhat still come up when you look at educational systems at school level, also at university level. And certainly the university education that I experienced was somewhat instructionist. It assumed you could put 150 students in a room and bombard them with information for 4 hours, and that we would all come out with some understanding of what was going on in that subject. And they were not wrong, but I certainly feel like I only learned the material very well when I had a chance to apply it in practice. And project-based education is one of the more constructionist approaches. It gives students a lot of control over what they're learning and how they're learning it. And one reason that's really important in today's higher education scene is that the higher education is increasingly commoditized, and people regularly ask, what value does this have? What does it bring? How is it useful for society? I'm sure many of you have read about sort of the 3 missions of universities: the mission 1, to do excellent research; mission 2, to do excellent teaching; and mission 3, to serve society. Now, what societies need is very variable, depends which country you're in, which region of a country you're based in, as to what the local economy might expect from your institution. But as a whole, universities have become much more use-driven, and that question of what do I get when I study a degree program is a very pertinent one for students. So at ETH, we've focused very strongly into competencies, which can be broadly defined as knowledge. So what knowledge do students acquire in a course? For example, facts, theories, concepts. What skills do they acquire? So what can they do after they finish studying? What procedures can they undertake? What strategies have they learned? And attitudes, so the beliefs and values that students can develop. Thinking about those competencies, they are subject specific, so the theories and concepts specific to a field. For example, how to manage a forest, how to be an engineer, how to calculate the forces. Whatever that might look like would vary a lot by the subject. And that is the primary driver of people studying. They wish to become the engineer, the physicist, the researcher of the future. So they need that subject-specific competence. However, and this is what I think where the society pressure comes in, there's increasingly a need or an expectation that graduates from universities can also do a lot of personal and social things. They can interact with people from across the world. They can interact in global companies, for example, across diverse cultures or with very different sorts of people. They can manage complex problems and run complex projects. We live in a knowledge society, and that knowledge society needs people who can talk, who can think outside the box, who can work with others who are very different to themselves. And if we as universities don't focus on those transferable competencies, then we risk not serving our graduates well and annoying, employers who wish not to have to train their graduate employees very extensively. They would like to have, kind of work-ready graduates. So project-based education is one way to emphasize the teaching of the transferable competencies. At ETH, this is actually quite a deeply embedded concept, although I would say it's only really been explicitly articulated in the last 10 years. When ETH was founded in 1855, one of the 6 departments it was founded with was what is now the architecture department, what was then the Bauschule. The Bauschule has always worked on this assumption that students need to be able to operate in a real world environment. They've worked from a model that was developed in the 1600s in architecture, where students would study under a master architect. They would work in groups or individually on building models, physical maquettes of buildings, understanding how the mechanical forces come together to construct a building, but also understanding how to make it usable for the people that have to live in it or work in it. And that approach of very practical experience combined with the necessary theoretical background to do it has informed certainly the architecture teaching at ETH for the last 150 years. In the 1970s, okay, so sorry, jumping around a bit here. That timing, that 1855 founding of ETH, was the sort of the first major flourishing of this sort of technical education that we now see certainly across Europe. And so in this way, the history of ETH is also a little bit the history of project-based education, because while in 1855 it wasn't entirely articulated, learning wasn't thought about like in this kind of way we think about it today. it was certainly recognized then that not everyone learns the same way, and that not every subject can be taught in the same way. By the early 1900s, that was quite explicit. Certainly there was a paper in 1918, I think, called The Project Method, where someone actually spelled out for schools how to teach students to do things rather than simply learn passively in rote learning. So at ETH in the 1970s, as I think across much of Europe, there were many student protests complaining about the quality of their education, wanting more agency, wanting more control over what they studied. ETH's response was to set up a project-oriented curriculum. It was based in the natural sciences department. And that ran for about 20 years. Not many students took it, but the ones that did certainly seem to have had a very impressive learning experience from that. In other countries, those protests looked a bit different. Some institutions pivoted very much towards an institution-level commitment to project-based curriculums. Other countries actually set up new universities around this period, also strongly influenced by this desire from students and I think society to have very good training that went beyond just theoretical knowledge into practice. So ETH ran the project-oriented curriculum for about 20 years, and some 15 years after that was closed down. And in response to alumni feedback, employer feedback, and so forth, the ETH Talent Project was set up by the rector to explore in more detail what exactly employers needed from universities like ETH, technical universities, in our case with a very good reputation, but what did employers actually wish to have in their graduates? And as a result of hundreds of hours of interviews and research, a competence framework was developed. You can read about it on our website. And that competence framework sort of explicitly talks about the skill set that a graduate from ETH could expect to have by the end of their degree. Not every student in every degree program would get every competence in the framework, but the ideal would be that many at least have had a flavor of those different things. And when they encounter it in the professional world, they can work with that. Once the framework was there, the part of the rollout of that was the creation of my little group, PB Labs, and our teaching spaces, and me as a person to support that. And again, we see this today. Many universities invest now in a way that they didn't used to in teaching support, in ensuring their lecturers get the support they need to deliver fantastic teaching. And this is a really wonderful thing. In fact, this Enhanced Alliance, this presentation today, is sort of a good symbol of what can happen when universities do invest in teaching. And then last year, the rector actually published a vision for teaching. I think it's the first one that's been published, where he really laid out exactly what the role of ETH is when it comes to teaching. What is it intending to do? What does it want to give students and society? It's a very interesting read. And this neatly brings us to this question. I keep talking about project-based education, but what are we actually talking about here? What actually is it? So one of my jobs when I first joined PB Labs was to make a definition that worked for ETH. Now, ETH is a huge institution. We have 30,000 students, and we run, I think, 75 degree programs, bachelor's and master's. Plus, we have a continuing education school with a further 60 or so programs. We every year deliver about 5,000 courses across those degree programs. So we really are a very big institution. So finding a way to talk about, project-based education that was relevant to that enormous range of people was quite a challenge. So we came up with this text here. It's a pedagogic approach. I think we can all agree with that. And it uses project work to foster both subject-specific and transferable competencies and independent learning. I think that's something we very much want to give our students, the ability to be independent thinkers, critical thinkers, and people who can control their own learning experience. That's a skill set and an experience that will live with them well beyond their time at ETH. In our experience at ETH, students typically work in teams, often with a guide or a coach who would be a student assistant or a teaching assistant, and they're usually given some sort of a challenge that's situated in a practice-based context. Now, that means simply a context that would be relevant for that student beyond ETH. So maybe it would of course depend on what they're studying, what that would look like. During the project, the students are encouraged to do independent inquiry and research, sometimes individually, often as a group, and they would typically also get expert inputs. Of course, the lecturing is still a really important part. Lecturer expertise is an essential part of our teaching. How it looks can be a bit different. Typically, students develop problem statements and solutions that are presented at the end of the course. Now, that's a definition. It's a bit vague. It has to be. We have such a diverse audience to give it to, but it breaks it down. We can break it down into sort of 6 major key features. So learning goals, I think most lecturers will be familiar with what those are. The real world or practice context, perhaps new to some of you. Exactly what your teaching process is, what you plan to do on each session within a semester, for example. This, again, will be familiar to many of you. The idea of giving students agency over their learning journey, this does alarm some people, but it's really not that, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. We're not saying like no control over what students do when, and I'll talk more about that when we make our burger together. Guidance and coaching, this simply reflects the fact that for many students, doing a project is very exciting, but it can be a little overwhelming too. So there is perhaps an additional role for many lecturers to go towards not just giving expert inputs, but also helping students understand what their next step could look like in a project experience. Assessment is, of course, even with project-based courses, a very important part. How do we know that students have learned to a standard that we at ETH can accept or write off as really good? We still have to do that. But with project-based courses, there's also an opportunity to review and give much more formative feedback during a semester. And I think that's a really powerful thing for students to experience. And finally, and again, a reasonably unusual feature for many courses that are not project-based, space for reflection and evaluation of the experience so far. Projects, as I said, can be very overwhelming, very exciting. So it's, in our view, very important that students get given a bit of room to stop and think, okay, we just did this big thing together. What does that mean for me? Where does that fit in my learning journey? What have I acquired from this experience that I can take with me? What might I do differently the next time? What might I do that again? I try that again a second time because it worked really well. So helping them do this, it's another way to sort of be critical and help them understand what they're learning. And given this era of student feedback and needing good, positive student feedback, I think giving students the space to not just criticize, I didn't like the way this was done, but to stop and think, what is that because I wasn't ready for it? Was it because it was badly done? Or was it because actually I didn't listen properly? Giving them that moment to breathe before hitting whatever student feedback survey they've received, I think is also really effective and helpful for us as lecturers. So at ETH, we then, again, we're trying to make this very, very usable by lecturers who are super busy and often don't have a background in didactic topics. We came up with basically 5 sorts of courses at ETH. We have classical project-based courses. These are where most of the content is taught through the project itself. They're really interactive. They can be very, very time intensive. Students have very strong ownership of what they do when and how it all works. And transferable competencies like collaboration, creative thinking and problem solving are really actively trained, whether that's in the way things are done by the lecturers or in the tasks the students are given. So that means students do have to work in groups. They have to be able to have some flexibility and choice in what they do. And lecturers have to think about delivering content in new ways. And typically they go for the whole semester. So you have one project really from start to finish. Another version that we see quite a lot of at ETH is what we call mini projects or sprints, which are lots of short projects. So kind of 2 to 3 weeks or maybe 1 to 3 weeks back to back, typically with sort of a little block of lectures and then alongside and then at the end, a bit more group work. We see these especially in our big undergraduate courses where, for example, you have foundations of engineering or something, and they work with several lecturers to deliver some very core content, but they don't just want to sit and give lectures. They want the students to have a bit of a more engaging learning experience. And so they work with these mini sprints. So students start getting a flavor of how the topic works and what's interesting, but they don't have to undertake a really big project course. It's more like small. They can do several bites at the project apple without getting overwhelmed. It also works really well if you have several lecturers. So each of them takes care of, say, 1/4 of a semester, and then they can choose to do like a little project for their topic. Then we have integration projects, which is where a lecturer might really divide the semester in half. They might have really a lot of theoretical content at the beginning, and then at the end they have a project to bring together all the information, give the students a chance to work with the theory that they've learnt. We see this particularly in courses where students need to learn a certain amount about a topic or a process or a method before they can safely work with it. For example, in chemistry, electrical engineering, you actually have to learn quite a bit of just mechanical stuff first before you can even imagine what you might do with that. And you certainly need to learn how to do that safely without breaking things or blowing yourself up or damaging the laboratory. We've also found this across where courses are paired across 2 semesters. Maybe you have a theory semester and then a project semester run by one lecturer, maybe a double course. Then we have the thesis semester or lab project. These are incredibly important project-based. They're not classical project-based because they often don't have the group work element. This is often a very self-directed individual project. They are incredibly important learning experiences, but they lack the sort of peer-to-peer interaction that fosters a lot of the collaboration. There's more kind of typically you're working with a senior researcher or a professor in a lab context or research context. And so it is nonetheless learning with projects, but it's not the same as a project-based course where you're sort of got a cohort all working on similar things all together. They are very important and often for many students are a real highlight of their learning experience. That's certainly the case for me as well. And then, of course, we have projects that are really not a project course. This would be a classical lecture, exercise or lab course, very content heavy, very controlled by the lecturer. Students don't get to choose much. Maybe they get to choose their lab buddy or something. You know, they all do the same thing. It's kind of cookie cutter or recipe book learning. And that's absolutely fine too. I mean, these are also really important courses, but they're not the same as the other types of courses here. Now, it should be said, from the classical project-based courses down to the thesis semester and lab projects, not every course at ETH has all of these elements. Many of them have sort of parts of the PBE, of the cycle of the key features here, not all of them. Typically, a real classical project-based course would really try to have something from each of these rectangles. And the sprints and the integration courses may only have a small amount of this. All of our courses should have learning objectives and all of them should have some form of assessment. That's a standard. But, you know, the emphasis given to reflection, to the practice context, to the student agency, this really varies a lot, partly based on the interest of the lecturer, partly on the context, and so forth. So that was a lot in a short time. Are there questions at this point? Does anyone want me to go back and clarify something or disagree with something I've put? I'm super interested. Just unmute and jump in, please, if you have a question. Or if it's in the chat, can someone tell me the question? Because I can't see the chat.
I have a short question, if it's
Thank you.
For that. You mentioned that the lecturer, the lecture part is very important. And you said that it's important to lecture expertise. What do you understand by the expertise in lecturing?
Lecture expertise, like you mean?
Yeah,
yeah, that's fine. Well, basically, a lecturer is okay. So take a step back. Students come to university to learn from experts, right? They pick their universities based on their level of interest, the reputation of the university, often the individual reputations of people within that university if they do something that's of interest to them. So one of the discussions we've had with lecturers when we talk about project-based education is they get concerned that by saying the emphasis is on the project, not on the lecturer, is that the student doesn't get the expertise from the lecturer. And we understand it the other way around. It's that they still get the expertise. It maybe just isn't like the lecturer at the front of the lecture theatre for 4 hours. It is the lecturer being there, guiding them. The guide on the side, as it were, highlighting relevant literature, encouraging them to explore certain avenues, and indeed giving expert inputs, but maybe not just giving expert inputs, also being there for a dialogue, being there for conversations. And I think that exposure to the lecturers is really essential. So when we talk about project-based, we absolutely do not mean there is no engagement with lecturers and lecturers don't need to do anything anymore. they do. They still need to be very knowledgeable, expert people. It just maybe the way they transmit their knowledge is different, more, more tailored, and perhaps maybe a concrete example of this. So we have a very big project called the INNO project here at ETH. It's in our engineering department, and it's a compulsory course for all second year undergraduates in engineering. And the lecturer has, therefore, 400 to 600 students. So he could have chosen to talk to them about autonomous robotics. They build an autonomous robot every year. And he could have chosen to do a theoretical course where he just sits and tells them about autonomous robots. When he flipped it around, he said, no, I would rather that they learn to do it themselves, because building robots ultimately is also a skill. And instead, his approach is to give them, he gives them videos on key concepts, so maybe how particular parts of the mechanism might work. So he pre-records that, makes that available on the learning platform, so they can access that anytime. They can go back to it over and over again if they don't quite get something or something's not working. And on top of that, he visits the workshops where they construct these robots every week at a set time. And any student can request him to come by their robot and talk to him and ask him questions about where they've got to. So he makes his expertise very available, but it looks very different to him being the expert on the front of the lecture theatre. It's still there, they still get the knowledge, they still get his inputs and suggestions, but it's just perhaps differently presented. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but that means that essentially the lecturer is doing a bit less, but not because he's working less. He's just giving the space to learn for the students, because there is no such thing as teaching. There's only learning. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, but that's a nice way to think about it. He's giving them a lot more space to take the expertise that they need at the point that they need it in that journey. Okay. Yeah.
I have more questions, but maybe it's better to listen to you, and then I will write down the questions and ask them near the end of the workshop.
Does anyone else have questions?
To ask something.
Of course, please.
How do you deal with a bit of a chicken and an egg problem? Because usually students need the knowledge to understand why they need the knowledge and to apply it in the project-based learning. And if you essentially make the learning process project-based, then it kind of affects students' motivation, especially at the very beginning, if they are not predisposed to like this from the very beginning. So you kind of have this issue that you do need to give them knowledge with the experience, but you also need to give them the experience so they're interested in doing the project-based learning. Do you have any tips and tricks to tackle that?
Yeah, so we had a colleague who left a couple of years ago, last year, unfortunately, but he came up with this visualization. So the idea would be, ideally, if you had a project-based curriculum, right, that you might have a curriculum. You might in the first year just do lots of little projects that maybe just focus on one thing. Like this project, you're just going to work out how to work with other people and how to manage your project. Everything else is very structured and really controlled by the lecturer. So you get much less agency, but maybe you just focus on one thing. And once you've done that quite a few times, then you can move on to bigger projects. And so here you could get maybe a lot more lecturing and just little tasks. And then here you get a little bit less lecturing, but you do a bit more self-directed research as a group. You have to present a bigger literature review or something. And by the end of your degree, you should be really, really good. They can say, here's your challenge, come back with a solution. And you know what that solution, how that solution should be constructed. And ideally you get some support along the way from the lecturer, but you can come and check in with them. Hey, we're thinking about this. And they might say, oh, that's nice. There's another theory or another literature source you might like to go and look at to direct your thinking. This would be the ideal. I think not every degree program at ETH thinks like this yet, but we're hoping to get them there. That's part of my role. But it's a great question. And you're right.
Thank you.
Having said that, we have very big first year courses. So, 18-year-olds coming into ETH, often living away from home for the first time. So they're navigating a lot personally. And our, what was the English translation? Umweltsystem, environmental systems studies degree. They have a compulsory first year course. And actually the first half of the first year is really spent on how do you do a degree? That's the level of conversation. They're given a lot of lectures. They're given a lot of workshop moments where they learn. It's really, really structured. And towards the end of the first year, it gets a lot more flexible. They start going out to meet stakeholders. They really get the challenge only halfway through the first year. Again, exactly recognizing that problem, that they have to have a certain baseline to work from. And you need to bring everyone up to the same standard before you can say, okay, now you can go off and do your own projects. But they've got a very, very structured, actually, I think I have an example in my slides of theirs later on. I can show you. Yeah, great question.
I caught something else while you were explaining that potentially, and if the effects of this project-based learning will amplify, if more educators in the same program will follow the same kind of idea of the project-based learning. Because if you are only one piece that is introducing lots of project-based learning and everyone else is doing classical lectures, then you will be the odd one out, and the students will be confused, like what are you trying to achieve in your classes? I think I did have some of that experience.
Oh, I think that's also with us a known challenge, but what they've done, the lecturers who do those courses tend to be very lively and very dynamic. So many of them have constructed a sort of almost a positive reputation. But, oh, this is the really cool course this year. Everything else is okay, but like this one is the cool one. So there's a couple of good examples of that where lecturers have managed to sell the course through the challenge that they picked or through the partners they work with to make it really, really exciting. And so students sign up and they want to do it. It has to be said, some students really, once they've done it once, they really then look for the project-based courses because they really enjoy that style of working. So for them to be able to have the choice is also nice. But yeah, these are conversations we do have. How much should we dictate that lecturers try to build this in versus, yeah, this comes down to university politics some of the time. It's tricky to enforce certain styles of teaching. We can just make recommendations and support lecturers who are curious. It's very hard to kind of say, you actually have more opportunity with a new university. That's why in some of the 1970s university foundations, they were able to really say, this university is built with this style of teaching, whatever style that is. And of course, now, 40 years later, they have the additional different challenges, but they at least were able to think consciously about the teaching DNA of that institution.
Thank you.
Cool. Time is running on, so I'm going to dive into our burger. Can I invite everyone to go and get a bit of paper and a pen? This is a hands-on drawing exercise to stimulate your creative thinking skills. So you need a piece of paper and a pen. Yeah? Okay, awesome.
Ready.
Love it. Right, here are my slides. All right, we are going to build a burger. And by the way, yeah, we're going to build an enhanced burger. Haha, enhanced. So what we need paper and a writing implement. If you've got coloring pencils, even better. What I'd like to do is walk you through the 6 key features of PBE, and through that we're going to construct the burger. So there's no need for artistic excellence. This is just a fun way to engage with a topic that can be a little dry. Afterwards, we will go into breakout rooms and you have a chance to share what you put in your burger. So what you need to do, first of all, you need to pick a course that you're going to work with. You can decide if you invent a new course, you can simply share or use an existing one that you already have. And it doesn't have to be a project-based course, of course. It ideally would be something new that you can then really think about. What I'd like you to think about first, when you've thought about your course, I'd like you to think about the content of that course, the learning objectives, 1 to 3 learning objectives relevant for your course. Ideally, some would be subject specific, but you might also think about transferable ones, transferable competencies that your course could develop. And what I'd like you to do, and I'll show you this on my camera, I'd like you to draw your burger patty. Can you see this? See what you can see. And I've lost my mouse. Great. There's my mouse. So what I'd like you to draw is a rectangle. This will be your burger patty. And I'm going to write in my burger patty, I'm going to write two of my learning objectives are learning about bees and learning about philosophy. Yeah, philosophy, we'll go with that. So you've got a couple of minutes to do that. So here's the slide back. And the reason I put the content as the patty is, of course, when you're thinking of a burger as a meal, that's really the juicy middle central bit. That's the bit you really want to eat. The rest of it's just trimmings. So with project-based courses, as with any course, really the content is absolutely essential. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one. I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am going too fast, please let me know by just unmuting or putting it in the chat. Then when you think about a burger coming from the restaurant on your plate, the first thing you see is the bun on top, right? That's the really exciting bit. It should ideally look appetizing, well structured, and so forth. And it's the same with the real world context. Alexander had this nice question: how can people be motivated to take a project-based course? They sound like a lot of work. Absolutely. But if the real world context is really attractive, if the story that lecturers can sell is really clever and relevant to students, then I think they will be interested in it. So you need to think about a real world context for your burger bun, as it were, at the top of your burger should ideally look really attractive for students. What could make your content, what organization could you work with? What field study or case study could make your content really interesting for students? It could be something that students work with day to day in their own lives. It could be something that has relevance to their careers afterwards. But that's why it's important to understand who your students are and what they're doing, what they're interested in when you're trying to teach. So I'm going to just write this. You can just see I've drawn the top of my bun here. Oops, you can see that.
I have a short question. That's
Of
just
course.
the top bun, not the bottom one.
Exactly. The bottom of the bun
Okay.
comes later, but great question. Sorry, I should have clarified.
No
it's
problem.
the top of the bun. Yeah.
Okay.
How are we getting on? Should I Are you ready to move on? Is it too fast? All right, then student agency and process. I thought about this as the tasty pickle because, you know, when you bite into your burger, there can be this little crunch and flavor burst when you get the pickle on your tongue. Student agency is really just giving the students space to explore a subject and a project without everything being controlled by the lecturers. So it can be very small scale. It could be literally just letting them pick who they work with, but then you give them everything else. You give them the templates, you give them the instructions, and they must do everything as you say. It can be a lot broader than that. It can really, you can go as far as saying, you know, here's the big context. You go pick a sub-project to work on. You can really give them full responsibility for, say, project management. You give them no milestones, no structure at all. Depending on the students, depending on their level, it can be very helpful to give them a very clear process, what you expect when. Intermediate milestones, intermediate assignments can be a very useful thing to do. Generally, less experienced students get less agency because they just don't have the experience to know how to manage that. So given the course that you're designing your burger for, what sort of agency might you be able to give them? Draw some pickles into your burger with the kind of agency. You can see, hopefully see here, I've drawn my pickles and I've written the words inside. My ones can pick their group and they can pick their topic. But that's it. Everything else is going to be dictated by me. All right. How are we? Can we move on? Has everyone managed to write something down for this?
Can you see those OKs which are appearing on the okay?
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I can't see the chat. So you know what? I'm going to join via my phone, then maybe I can also see the chat.
But they are not appearing on the chat. They are appearing just below the presentation and on the avatars. Yeah, but I can see many of those. So I think that means people are ready.
Help. I've now really screwed up.
Okay, don't you worry. I will help you with the chat and with those.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I could join on my phone, but I think it cancelled the. Okay, so can you still see my slides?
Yes.
I can. Yes, that's good. I can now hear you again. Okay, so then the next step, and this is perhaps one that's very not at all familiar to people who've not experienced project-based courses. Oh, sorry. It is this need for expert input and guidance. So when you're running a project course, you as the lecturer are a really valuable commodity. the students are indeed working in groups, they're working independently and all that, but they need help from you to deepen their understanding of a topic, to respond to questions when they get stuck, to make sure that they're on the right track, and indeed to provide them with the base understanding of what they're meant to be doing. It sounds really simple to do that, but actually for the first time lecturers running their first project course, it can be quite a shift in task load, or how the tasks look, from just preparing a lecture, giving the lecture, dealing with one or two follow-up questions, and that's it, to a much more hands-on and interactive interaction. There's actually a nice phrase, from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. That transition of the role can be quite challenging for some people. And especially when you're then handling a very big cohort, say more than 30 students, it can be very, very beneficial for you as the lecturer coordinating the whole thing to have a layer of coaches between you and the student groups. Otherwise, you end up with, maybe say 20 student groups, all with questions, all of them different, because they're all in different places with their projects, can get very overwhelming. So what we at ETH are promoting is the idea of student coaches who can guide a process. They're not necessarily topic experts, but many would be, because they'd probably be students from the same degree program, but maybe from higher years. So say for a first year course, they might be second or third year bachelor students coaching first year bachelor students. And they would handle the day-to-day questions of, oh, I can't figure out how this screw attaches to my robot, or I can't figure out where to find this information. They can handle a lot of those small-scale queries. And then when it's a really big query, or three coaches say, you know what, I have nobody in our groups understands concept X. And then they can pull in the lecturer and say, right, we need to give a short input, 15 minutes on that concept, go back over it. They might have studied it a year ago, but they've all forgotten what that looks like. And then the lecturer can really bring in their experience and expertise very thoughtfully, but not also deal with a huge amount of communication with students. At all times in a project-based course, it should be clear to students where they can get support. So you need to think about for your course, what sort of support might your students need? Are they going to need technical support because you're getting them to construct something? Do they need maybe data analysis support, or do they need coding support, or do they just need, I don't know, some other sort of support? And how could you do that efficiently? So again, this comes back to how many students do you have, what's available to you in your institution, but have a little think about that and then write it down on your burger, on a lettuce leaf shaped thing. I'm going to draw for mine. So for example, in my course, which has got a not very good lettuce leaf, I'm going to offer a Q&A via a Moodle forum. That'll be a really easy way to manage student requests and stop my inbox getting filled up. Okay, can we move on? Are people okay? Then we come to the really big topic of review and assessment. This is a topic that causes conflict everywhere. How do we assess learning? How do we value what people have done fairly in a way that is also standardizable? These are big questions. One of the nice things about project-based courses, because they have generally have an ongoing process through the semester, you can put in intermediate assignments that might be summative or they might be formative. And all that really means is that you have a chance to check in on how your thinking is developing and a chance to adjust what you're doing before the very final grade. And that for students, I think, can be a really nice experience. So have a think, what sort of assessment might be relevant for your content. And especially when you're thinking about transferable competencies, have a think about what assessments would allow you to be sure that on the transferable competencies, you are also giving them weight. What I mean by this is when you're talking about, oh yeah, we train students in creative thinking. How do you know at the end of the course whether your students learned to think more creatively or not? What can you come up with there? If you're explicitly in your learning objective saying, oh yes, students will learn to collaborate. Well, what does that look like when it comes to assessment? How can you assess the quality of group work or collaboration? What mechanisms can you put in place for that? It can be very tricky. And however, if you put it in your learning objectives as oh yeah, we explicitly train something that's a little intangible, students will want to see that reflected in the assessments that they get. Simply assessing, oh yeah, did you turn in your slide deck at the end of your project? We actually don't care whether you got on or thought about a good management process for your project. It is not that inspiring. So students, it can be good to think about how you're planning assessment and not just default to here's the final product, let us grade that is the entire grade, but think about how can we build up a grade across a semester so that students are motivated to keep on working, that they get all the breadth of their learning recognized. As an example, and that's the bottom of the bun, and the reason for that is if your burger has a squishy, not very good burger bun bottom, then the whole thing falls apart. And so assessment is really, really essential. And a well-constructed assessment approach is therefore very important for the success of the whole PBE burger or course. So as an example, I've drawn the bottom of my burger now. I hope you can see that. And I've got 3 different parts to the assignment. I've got a written management plan. I've got a group process, which is via Miro. So I'm assessing also their group process. And I'm also going to invite them all to do an individual assignment, a personal observation or reflection, because that way I can also see a little bit how the individual members of a group are engaging with the material and what they've learned. And that allows me to both see the group result and the individual result. All right, I hope everyone's managed to write down some ideas for assessments. Ideally summative and formative, so something at the end that gives a grade and something along the way that doesn't give a grade. And then finally, I want to talk about the last key feature of project-based education, which is reflection. As I said, project courses can be a little overwhelming and very driven by the deadlines and the assignments. And that means that students don't always see what it is that they've learnt through the project, particularly as the learning can be much broader than just the content, right? It can also be how I work with others, how I am in a group, how I deal with stress, how I deal with management, managing multiple deadlines or something. So giving them some space either weekly or at several points through the semester, or even just at the end of the semester, to stop and look back. What have they done so far? What have they learned? What would they take with them? This can be really helpful. So I see it as the sauce in the burger. It kind of brings everything together. Without it, yeah, sure, you have a nice burger, but it's even better with the sauce when you kind of bring the whole experience together and get perspective, but also a chance to really understand the learning that you've done. So my invitation to you would be to think about when might you bring in a reflection moment. What could that look like for your students? What would make sense? What do they already do elsewhere in the institution? And typical reflection tasks could be simply writing answers to two or three little questions. It could be no more than 100 words. It could be very small, or it could be a really great big graded element. Yeah, please turn in a learning journal for every week of the project. It's going to be 20% of your grade. So it can be kind of everything in between. At ETH, we've seen lots of different approaches. We've seen people give a group weekly reflection. People have been asked to send a personal voice note rather than writing anything, recognizing that many students have a phone in their hand that they can quickly press a record and just send. Another team used a Padlet where people had to every week put a sticky note on this online system where they could see what everyone else had written as well. So it's really diverse. It's up to you as a lecturer, really, what you do there. So think about what your source could look like. And then draw it on your burger. Actually, I'm going to draw mine next to it as a bottle. Because my burger drawing has gone a bit squiffy. There we go. I put my burger is next to my sauce is next to my burger now. I hope you can see it. Burger-based learning, absolutely. Love it. Yes, we have a new title for our organization. All right, if people are finished, then we can move on to the next step. Oh yeah, then just the last thing, we're not going to go through this in detail now, but I think most of you who have experience with teaching will be very familiar with the importance of the context for your teaching. You need to be aware of how big your class is, how many ECTS points do you have to hand out, when are your sessions, how long are the sessions, what does the schedule permit, and think about things like material costs and teaching infrastructure. What does your project, so some project-based courses, certainly at ETH, come with quite considerable additional boundary conditions, like it can only be 2 hours and it's only going to be between 4 and 6 p.m. So how do you make that slot exciting? And what happens when you say, now we run a project and now that means the students have to build this thing, so we need a workshop full of X and Y equipment. Who funds that? Where is that space? How much access do students have? What about if students want access out of hours on a weekend? This kind of infrastructure questions are really important to bear in mind when you're designing a project-based course. And then, of course, the other question is always, who's teaching with you? Are you by yourself? Do you have access to others to support you? Do they need training in, for example, supervision or coaching? And of course, you'll have to bring them on board to the project itself. So how, what is their role? How will they help you? Those kinds of things. So that's the packaging for your burger. It's not always easy to fit your burger into your package or the shape of the packaging, but with a bit of creative thinking, I think most obstacles you can find a way around. But it's not easy. So, first of all, I wanted to invite everyone to take a burger selfie, so you can make your cameras visible and then hold your pictures up. Like, here's my one. I'm really pleased with my drawing, actually. You can tell I've been practicing this over the last week. And then maybe I take a screenshot. Oh my goodness, Roman, that's an amazing looking burger. You've got a flag and everything. I love it. Oh, this is so cool. Oops. Okay, I can't.
But I didn't manage to put everything I need in this burger.
Yeah, artistic.
It should be so big that no one could eat it.
Amazing. Well, thank you for really getting in with the creative side. I appreciate it. Now, my idea was next that people would go into breakout rooms and you could share what you put in your burgers and also meet the other people on the floor. So
and how big rooms would you like to have? There is 17 of us.
Maybe groups of 3 in that case for 15 minutes. Does 17 divide into 3?
That's 16 plus you, so.
Okay, yeah, so I can hop around. Cool. So if you put everyone into breakout rooms and then we go there till like 25 past, this would be good, no?
I think we've also managed to scare some people away.
Right.
Because now it's 14.
Oops. Okay, so then why don't you put us into 3s? Still put us into 3s, and I'll still be the spare person.
So around 4 rooms. Okay, let's try it. Okay.
Hello.
And we are having Emily again. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah, we were having some difficulties in our group with people being able to unmute, and like Teams was not playing ball. So sorry to all of you struggling with that.
Yeah, but at least in some rooms it worked.
It did, and this is very good.
I could see that some people were visually muted, like the icon was as if they're muted, but they were able to speak, and I could hear them. So it's Teams magic. Love Microsoft.
Like everyone.
It's okay. Now, thank you, first of all, to all of you who participated in this. I'm really happy how that went. I wanted to just share a few more bits around the PBE classroom, because I know, well, certainly when we've been talking to lecturers, that's often where they get stuck. They can kind of get the principles, the key features are all reasonably clear, and then they hit the actually, what do I do in my classroom? And that, for some of them, can be very difficult. So I thought it might be interesting just to see a bit how we approach it. So I will just share those. And again, so maybe before I do that, are there any questions so far? We'll have some time at the end as well for questions.
Okay, so I have some questions, but I will skip them.
Okay. All right, so is this working? Yes, the PBE classroom. So specifically, I wanted to focus on coaching because I think that is probably going to vary across all of our institutions and certainly within ETH, within our departments, how that is done. But we are trying to think about that very coherently at the ETH level. So yeah, so a PBE classroom isn't much different to a regular classroom if your regular classroom is not a rate lecture theatre. Rate lecture theatres are really difficult for project-based course. This is where, you have like lots of rows and they kind of go up towards the back, and it's very difficult to do interaction when people are trying to walk half a kilometre down the road to talk to their colleague. But basically, in a project-based classroom, as far as we've observed and I've experienced, it's a mix of teamwork, guidance, and preparation. So you as the lecturer have to do the same amount of preparation as you'd have to do for a lecture. Keeping your lecture slides updated, keeping the reading lists updated, and all of this still has to happen. This doesn't change. The only thing that might change, or that does change, is perhaps when the preparation happens. Certainly my observation of lecturers giving, and my experience of giving like lecture courses, is there's a continuous background preparation going on, ready for your next lecture, coming back from the questions you got from the last lecture. What do you add in? What do you take away? What new research has come out that changes the way you need to present the material? So that preparation doesn't change. The shift, probably the biggest shift for lecturers in particular, is becoming the guide on the side, as I mentioned earlier, and focusing on how you give guidance, when you give guidance, what that guidance looks like for you versus, say, student coaches. Can take a bit of thinking through, and is often easiest done when you actually test it for the first time. In a traditional lectures course, the learning journey is very driven by you. You tell them what they know, what they learn when. You give them all the content, and they just have to knuckle down and do whatever assignments you give them. That's the other big shift. The teams, the groups of students lead the classroom in a way. They are the ones that say, we need this now, we need this other topic in a week or so. And again, very much not filling up empty vessels. People are very active learners in a project-based classroom. So bearing that in mind, at ETH, we talk about student coaches, and that looks like this. Now, we at PB Labs talk about student coaches. The university has a wide range of labels for people who support others in their learning process. We have tutors, we have student mentors, we have student coaches, we have teaching assistants, we have doctoral teaching assistants. I mean, the list of job titles is quite extensive. What we've tried to do is clarify it down to these three words. So tutors are people who have the right answer. And we often have, for example, you'll have a theoretical input on, I don't know, some mathematical concept, and then you'll have tutor groups where you work through a series of exercises with someone who knows the correct answer and can make sure you've done it correctly. Those are tutors. Then we have mentors. Those are people who speak from their own experience, and that is their own experience, and that's often incredibly helpful, but it's a slightly biased answer because it's only their experience. They've not, they share their thoughts, their ideas, their suggestions, but it's they're mentors, not coaches. And for us, coaches are people who help you find your answer. So they are not topic experts necessarily, and they're not going to you're not going to go to them and say, oh, we have this problem, and they're going to say, here is the solution. They're going to ask you, how could you find a solution? And they'll help you through questions and through suggestions to find out your own solution. So they don't share and instruct in knowledge, and they do focus on method-specific and social and personal competencies. And that's because also when you're running project groups, you might have, the problem might not be, we don't know how to attach this wheel to our robot. The problem might be, I don't get on with my colleagues. I don't like my group. Somebody in the group isn't working enough, and the rest of us are having to do more work than we want to. So there, one thing we do focus on quite a lot when we train our student coaches, we do emphasize the how to communicate skills, skills in communicating, defusing tensions, helping people move past problems. Those are not things you have a solution to. Those are processes that you as the coach need to help guide others to their own solution. You can't impose a solution on a group and say, now you will all get on and work beautifully together. They have to figure that out for themselves, but they need maybe someone to help them in that discussion. And that's what our coaches can do. And the other very important thing is the coaches are not there to guide the students to a specific predefined solution. Again, the students do that. The students decide for themselves where they're going and they make all the decisions. The coach is simply there to say, okay, have you thought about all sides of that decision? Have you considered every aspect? And maybe they are hinting that maybe there's something that the students forgot to explore. So it's very much there as a process supporter, not as a director and not as someone who shares a lot of knowledge. Now, the reality is at ETH, we have many coaches who are also knowledge experts, and that's also very helpful because they can support the lecturer quite effectively. If I show you this graphic, maybe this helps. So this is a very classic teaching situation at ETH. You have a lecturer in a big session, a series of teaching assistants and tutors who give like very directed exercises. In a project-based classroom, you'd have the lecturer, and then you'd have the team coaches. And these team coaches are there to help with problems, maybe. And if they have the technical background, they can also give a little bit of guidance. Oh, you might like to look at X or Y theory or Z paper or whatever it might be. But the key thing is here that the coaches go to the lecturer when there's a problem at the group level. So the students don't directly reach out to the lecturer necessarily. They might say to the coaches, we don't understand this concept. And the coach might go to the lecturer and say, could you either talk to those students one-to-one or might bring it up in the next time they're all in class together, that content is covered. So they sort of buffer between the lecturer and the student groups. And they might say, everyone is stuck with this issue with the process. Like, could you maybe share another tool? And the lecturer can think, okay, what do I know that might help? And then they would be able to do that. So the idea here is not that the team coaches are like the controllers of the student groups, but they're really there to sort of support. Oops. Okay, what's happened? My mouse has vanished. Here we go. The other format we've seen at ETH a lot, particularly because we do sometimes have very, very big classes, is that some lecturers have chosen to move towards putting their lecturing as a video or as an automated learning material. And that can also reduce, it's a one-time effort because you have to record all the material and plan all of that. And that is not a small task. But we've also observed that can work very well. And then the other model of coaching that we do see is, for example, there's a very big coding class for first-year undergraduates in not in informatics. So that's medical students and environmental students and like lots of students who need to know how to code but will not be working a lot with that. So they have a lot of video material to help them understand it, and they can go back to that as often as they need. They also have what they call coaches, and they are also trained, but they work one-to-one with the students because coding is a very difficult topic. And so they decided, okay, although they could have worked in groups, they decided to keep the one-to-one emphasis. And again, the coaches here don't tell the students what the solutions are if the student is stuck, but they help the student understand how they, the student, might solve the problem. Because otherwise, students who will not work in that, the students need to learn how to problem solve. So what the coaches are actually doing is training the problem solving skills of the students. The students are learning to problem solve and learning to code, kind of side by side. So they're getting the content, but they're also getting a really important skill, which they can also use elsewhere. So these are just two models of coaching, a one-to-one coaching classroom and a team coaching classroom, which we've been working on. So we've been developing sort of what skills does this level of these yellow ones need to have? What would be the helpful competencies for the coaches? And then in addition, are there, for especially very big classes, is there an additional need for, say, somebody who also knows how to work in a workshop for a class doing a lot of physical construction of something? Is there somebody who also needs to be there to help with, say, a specific tool or process that maybe these coaches don't know about because they're just not experienced enough, but nonetheless, the students might need those specialist inputs. So we're trying to sort of structure an education framework around this. The other thing I wanted to highlight is For me, the really most unique aspects of a project-based course are the challenge, that aspect of making content super relevant to a real world environment and really working on something tangible. And the independent inquiry, really leaving it to the students to drive themselves forward. Guiding that process is very, very helpful. We know that it's challenging to do projects. We know that it's not always that attractive from a workload perspective. It can feel like you're doing many more hours of work than, say, for a lecture class. So when lecturers say, oh, but I don't want to overload the students, there are lots of solutions for that. You can do things like provide templates, you can provide grading rubrics, you can be very, very clear from the outset what the results should look like, and all of that can help students manage the project experience and keep it within sort of a manageable boundary. I guess many of you are familiar with the concept of constructive alignment, but that's also something we very much encourage at ETH, is like your learning objectives, your assessment, and what you actually do in class should really sit as a triangle, and they should really strongly interact. So if you have a learning objective that is not captured in the assessment and is not captured in what you do, it's not going to be very successful. Equally, if you have a learning objective and an assessment that's super tightly coordinated, students will see that. They'll be like, okay, I'm meant to learn this. I'll know I've learnt it when I get that grade on that assignment. Brilliant. They'll be very motivated to get that and able to talk about it afterwards. As a final wrap up, I think we have time. I wanted to show you a couple of our project-based classes. These are the bigger examples. We've written them up actually on our website, partly to help students and lecturers to understand what a project-based class can look like. So this is a very big class. It has about 120 students, and they have 14 weeks to design a business. The end result is a business plan, and actually last year they chose to submit the best business plan from the class, went to European competition to get funding. So the students were really motivated. They were allowed to bring their own business ideas with them, and enough students brought business ideas that I think all of the ideas that they worked on in the class were brought by a student in the class. Then they formed groups. In the first week, they formed groups, and then you can see in yellow the assignments. They had 6 assignments in total, one basically every 2 weeks. In red, they also had input lectures from the lecturer every week, and they also had a coaching session where they could get feedback on where they were going with their thinking and their development. So, for example, with the prototypes and business model session in week 8, they got the input, they had done some work on it, and then they got a coaching later that, I think, somehow that week as well, where they could say already, okay, so when you said a business model and I've produced something that's not quite a business model, here's how they could improve it. So they were able to get like really good inputs along the way. This is another one. It looks very similar because it's in our graphics, but this was with an MAS. This is something we have in Switzerland. It's a continuing education program. And this was another 1 semester project with about 20 students, and 6 UN and other international aid agencies came in with actual challenges that they brought. So the students met the agencies and the organizations at the beginning. They had a call with them in the middle, and then they presented them, and they had a very big pitching event with about 60 people present, including members from the people from the partner organizations at the end. So they were very, very motivated to do all the work really well, because they knew they'd have to stand in front of them and present the work. And they had quite a few deadlines, you can see here, because they're much older students. These were typically like late 20s to the early 50s, really diverse backgrounds, but the students themselves are much more able to manage a project, so they didn't need as many intermediate milestones, but they did need quite a lot of coaching because they wanted to do a really good job. So they set up several coaching sessions and a call with a partner organization to get feedback on the ideas, so that they didn't come up with something that at the end the organization couldn't use. Then I mentioned earlier we have a very big first year course in environmental sciences, which is incredibly structured. So you can see this is that course. It's called Environmental Problem Solving. So you can see they've got lectures and inputs here in dark blue. They've got assignments in yellow. And they've got orange, in orange, they've got group work. So you can see just how much structure these first year undergraduates get. They get a huge number of very small assignments, a lot of inputs, so that they are guided and their competencies are built in a very careful and structured way. And you can see at the end, so these dotted ones here are optional. So by the end, they're saying, hey, some of this is optional. If you feel like you've already got this content, go for it. You don't have to join. And you see here in white, these white circles, that is when they get the actual projects that they work on with stakeholders. And that's when they're allowed out. So they've already halfway through their first year before they're allowed to actually talk to any project person, because again, the university and well, the lecturers want that interaction to be very positive for both sides, and the students need to get to grips with how to run a project before they can go out and talk to people, because they're very young and early stage. And they also have a really big exam at the end, because there's a lot of content trained through this, and the students need to show individually that they've acquired that content. So there we go. Those are a few of our really big courses. And this is, oh yeah, I should say this one is for about 150 students and runs across 2 semesters. So it's the full first year. So Bartok, you had a question. I'm sure others of you have questions too. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. As a matter of fact, I have a question that might be a challenge. Since there are, what is the challenge? Since there are many people in the group, because project-based education is basing on forming those groups, there are some risks of making the illusion of competencies, because not everyone are learning the same skill in some sets, if you don't think about it truly. And another thing is that some of those students, we have mentioned that several times, some of those students might even avoid learning. And how to tackle that problem?
This comes a bit back to the assessment. So my recommendation is always to have a mix of group assessments and individual assessments. So by all means, put an exam at the end of your course. That's a great way to assess, did people get the key content that you want, the subject-specific content that you wanted them to have. It sucks because no one likes revising and doing exams, but you can do that. It's not excluded from a PBE course.
So you're not disencouraging people making the exams?
I mean, if that's important to you to know that they got X and Y content to a good standard, fine. Do an individual assignment or do an exam. Do I like sitting exams myself? Absolutely not. So would I personally prefer not ever to do an exam? Yes. So, I think if you can get them to show specific things, for example, in the group assignment, it then comes down to personal preference. Do you wish to know that person X did all the work for that piece of the assignment and person Y really didn't bother to read it? I mean, fine. Make them do an oral presentation or something about the coursework and then, see who didn't participate or didn't prepare. So I think there are lots of ways that you can get at what did individuals contribute, what did individuals take away from a project. But I think it's always worth checking your own need to know individual learning versus group learning. How important is it that they individually evidence that they can work in a group or do collaboration or do creative thinking, versus how important is it that they get the experience of doing it in a group, maybe realize themselves through a reflection that, I'm not actually very confident with that, and just take that knowledge forward. It does, I mean, yes,
I know what you mean. That's quite useful, as a matter of fact, but still, I have this feeling that it might be a challenge, because when you have, 5 people in a small group, there is a chance that some of those people would not have the same set of skills at the end. So despite the fact that you are encouraging me to make an exam at the end, some people might struggle more than others.
They might.
And I have to accept that. Am I right?
I'm a big fan of group assignments and letting people struggle.
Okay.
Personally. Okay. For example, in my burger, I had a wildflower meadow management course. And so I thought my, obviously a big written management plan would be a great group assignment. This would be a big group assignment. Everyone contributes. You give them some sort of structure. I don't really mind who did what in there. I actually don't mind if one person did nothing but did the copy editing at the end. That's still a valuable participation in a group assignment. But then I want also to see the group process. So I set up a Miro board and everyone has to fill in the Miro board regularly. So I know where all the groups are. I can go on the Miro board and check, oh, has group A done anything? You know, what are they up to this week? And you can see with the Miro who put which post-its and who did which tasks, if they did it properly. So you can see already, is this group in a good state because they filled in the Miro board? Is the work evenly distributed? Or is it obvious from all the red points against this one name that this one person is not participating?
Okay.
So you can kind of monitor it.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, does it matter if that person?
Would you say that giving some additional points for those activities is a good idea? Okay.
Yeah, you can do that for sure. In fact, in the executive project that I ran with the executives, you know, these are grown adults, these are senior leaders who've got at least 5 years leadership experience. It was necessary to do a point allocation to ensure equal participation. I was like, okay, we're not in kindergarten, but gold stars are available to those who earn
Working
them.
with adults is very difficult. I understand what you mean.
Sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Can I jump in on this topic, because it prompted at which point this guidance becomes management, because like it's kind of very tipping from one side to the other, and I think that's what Bartholomew was saying, that you basically have students that you need to engage somehow, but you want to engage all of them and you want to make sure that it's all of them who got this assignment. So your approach obviously is that you want to guide them towards that, but I think it will not work with all the students. So there's some aspects of management, like, is there a gold standard for this? Basically, that would be my question.
Great question. I don't think there's a gold standard necessarily. It's always going to be contextual. Like if a student is struggling, I think the first responsibility of any academic would be to understand why they're struggling. Is it that they are stuck intellectually with the content? Is it that something else is going on? We know that students we all have complicated lives. We have caring responsibilities. We've got struggles that we don't always see. I've worked a lot with refugees, and some people are incredibly good at masking the most intolerable stress. You meet a well-rounded individual living in Switzerland who came here from 10 years ago, but it turns out their village back home got bombed last week because they're from Afghanistan, and you don't even notice until suddenly something goes wrong in class and you're like, okay, what happened there? And then they tell you and you're just like, oh geez, okay, that's fine, you take this week off, like, you know. So I think finding out those stories are always a really important part of being a lecturer, before judging and docking points for not participating. Equally, I think there's a responsibility on the part of the student to communicate proactively that they are having a hard time, they got sick with COVID, they broke their leg, whatever it is. If a group is struggling, this is again where the lecturer-coach dynamic is important, because a coach can't solve every problem. It's not expected. There might be a group that just does not get on for whatever reason. Inappropriate behavior, personality clashes beyond what anyone can handle. And at that point, the coach can escalate that to the lecturer, and the lecturer decides what happens. Are points docked? Are individuals moved around the group? Do we set up a gold star system to ensure good behavior? I mean,
we can just stop at the gold star system. That's our gold standard, literally.
Yeah, worst case. All the groups that didn't annoy me get a gold star. But I think that power of escalation and giving the lecturer that authority to be like, no, you have to pull your socks up, or you need time out. This is kind of one of the roles. It's a different role to just standing in front of the class being an expert. Not everyone loves it, but it's powerful. Now, before the end of the thing, I had one more Menti for you, just to get a little sense of how it's going. I've now lost the chat. Where's it gone? So maybe you could be so kind as to the Menti link that was shared earlier, which I'm now failing to find.
I'm sending the link on the chat again.
That would be great.
No problem. And since you are not checking the chat, Philip Bieri is sending his regards, but he had to go.
Yeah, understandable. I would just love to know a bit how this is for you, where you're feeling now with project-based education. This one should be a Mentimeter. Yay.
Since we are waiting for some responses, can I ask one more question?
Of course.
The last one. Okay, perfect. Let's use that time.
Absolutely.
You were talking about tutors, mentors, and coaches.
Yes.
Do you think that could you be a mentor and a coach? I mean, to switch those roles through the course?
Yes, I think you have to, because I mean, ultimately, we all do these interactions through our own experience. It's all filtered through our own experience as well. I think one of the nice things about taking a training in that is it gives you the self-realization when you're inhabiting one role and when you're inhabiting the other roles. So just being aware, okay, now I'm switching from being a coach where I don't kind of just helping you with the process to saying, I really recommend you do X or Y. I think just being aware that you're switching and maybe being transparent about that switch is helpful. It's hard not to switch sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, massive thanks from my side. That was a real privilege to share the stuff we've been working on for the last couple of years.
And I as I can see on this Menti, I think we are also absolutely thrilled that you had that lecture. So thank you.
Very kind. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions, maybe?
Or comments?
I have one question, maybe. How students react for the first time when you announce the type of method you are going to utilize during your lectures or during your courses?
I think
it was like full resistance, or they were very happy to do it?
At ETH, we write everything. We try to write everything into a course catalog, so they sort of know what they're getting into. But one advice we've given is to always emphasize in week one what the expectations are, what the process is. Don't leave that as a hidden surprise until halfway through the semester. So we try to encourage lecturers to write it transparently in the course catalog. This is a group project or a group project-based course or something, and then to, again, reiterate that in the first couple of weeks. At ETH, we allow our students to switch courses in the first couple of weeks. They can also come, see the class, and then if they decide not to take it, that they don't get a penalty. I think for the first 3 weeks, they can switch to a different class. So that's also a chance to kind of come in, see if it's going to suit, and then go away if you don't like the look of it.
Okay, thanks. Because even in our university catalog, it is written everything about the course. The students very rarely read it. So they base on the information from the other groups, which took the course the year before. So it may change.
That is an issue when a lecturer changes between the years from like a more traditional to a project-based. They get a bit of a shock. But again, I think it's why the fact you can switch over in the first 3 weeks is quite helpful, because then you can come and realize, oh gosh, this is not what I thought I signed up to. And
this is again. Basically a very good idea to have an opportunity to switch between the courses. At our university, it is allowed, I think, over 2 weeks, because later on the course is running, so they will have some problems to get on with the material they have to learn. But thank you very much. That was very interesting seminar. And
thank you.
I took some ideas from that. Thank you.
Cool. Happy to keep the conversation going. I mean, particularly within the Enhance Alliance, I think this is one of the strengths of this network, is we can exactly share these experiences and approaches But yeah, happy it was interesting and helpful.
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you.
And I saw that you already noticed what is happening on the chat and you are receiving many likes and hearts.
Thank you. I appreciate,
Okay.
you have no idea how much I appreciate that.
Perfect. We have any other questions? Because our time is up. So if not, I would like to thank you again for your time and thank you everyone for participating actively and hope to see you again on another occasion. So
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And especially you, Emily.
Thank you.
Emily, would you be so kind and stay for a few moments at the end? Okay.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
switching off recording. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.